Imagine a beloved Texas preacher, a pillar of faith in his community, suddenly accused of a gruesome murder. But what if I told you the real killer was the one person he trusted most, his own father? And it doesn't end there. This father didn't just want his son out of the way, he wanted his son's wife for himself. What unfolds is a shocking tale of betrayal, manipulation, and murder that will leave you questioning everything you know about family and faith. Stay with us, because in this episode, we'll uncover the chilling details of Rebecca Taylor's murder, the twisted frame-up, and the explosive trial that exposed a father's darkest secrets. If you love unraveling shocking true crime stories like this one, you're in the right place. Welcome to True Crime Exposed, where we dive deep into the cases that leave the world stunned. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. In the small town of Carthage, Texas, New Light Fellowship Church wasn't just a house of worship, it was the heart of the community. The congregation gathered every Sunday to hear Pastor Jacob Steele, a 34-year-old preacher whose charisma and unwavering faith made him a beacon of hope for his flock. With his wife Hannah by his side, their 4-year-old daughter Grace often playing in the pews, Jacob seemed to have it all: a loving family, a devoted congregation, and a reputation as a man of God. But behind closed doors, a storm was brewing, one that would shatter the peaceful facade of their lives. Jacob's father, Earl Steele, was a 59-year-old former preacher who once commanded his own pulpit with fire and passion. But years earlier, Earl had been forced out of ministry when a scandal involving financial mismanagement and inappropriate behavior surfaced. Stripped of his title and disgraced, he watched from the shadows as his son stepped into the role he believed was rightfully his. As Jacob's popularity grew, so did Earl's bitterness. What began as simmering resentment soon transformed into an all-consuming rage. But there was another layer to Earl's hatred, one far more sinister: his growing obsession with Jacob's wife, Hannah. Hannah Steele was everything Earl believed he deserved: a beautiful, kind, and loyal partner who stood unwaveringly by Jacob's side. Earl's fixation on her became twisted, fueling not only his jealousy but a dangerous sense of entitlement. His mind began to craft a dark narrative: if Jacob were out of the way, perhaps Hannah could be his. What began as envy quickly spiraled into a deadly plan. Earl needed a scapegoat, someone unsuspecting and easy to manipulate, to take the fall for the crime he was about to commit. That someone was Rebecca Taylor, a 26-year-old church volunteer known for her kindness and willingness to help anyone in need. Rebecca, trusting and devout, had no idea the danger she was walking into when Earl began to draw her into his orbit. What followed would be a tragic collision of innocence and evil, one that would forever stain the legacy of the Steele family and leave the town of Carthage reeling. On the evening of June 15, Rebecca Taylor stayed late at New Light Fellowship Church to assist with a donation drive. As the event wrapped up, Earl Steele approached her with his usual calm demeanor, asking if she could help him with a special project in the storage shed. Rebecca, known for her helpful nature and unwavering trust in the elder Steele, agreed without hesitation. She had no idea this would be the last act of kindness she would ever perform. Inside the dimly lit shed, Earl began with small talk, praising Rebecca for her dedication to the church. But as the conversation took an unsettling turn, Rebecca became uncomfortable. Earl's tone shifted from admiration to something darker, his words laced with inappropriate insinuations. When she attempted to leave, Earl blocked the door, his expression growing cold. He cornered her, demanding she prove her loyalty to the church and to him. Rebecca, horrified and defiant, resisted his advances and threatened to expose him. Her words struck a nerve, igniting a mix of fear and rage in Earl. In his panic, he grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from a nearby shelf and struck her across the head. The blow was swift and brutal, knocking Rebecca unconscious as she collapsed onto the cold floor. For a moment, Earl stood staring at Rebecca's lifeless form. But then, the reality of what he had done began to sink in. His mind raced as he realized this was no longer about silencing Rebecca, it was about covering his tracks. Earl called on Billy "Red" Carter, a transient he had hired for underhanded jobs in the past. Billy was a drifter, a man with no ties and a reputation for doing anything for the right price. Earl promised him a hefty sum if he helped make Rebecca disappear. Together, under the cover of darkness, they loaded her body into the back of Earl's truck and drove to a secluded wooded area near the church. There, with only the moonlight to guide them, they dug a shallow grave and buried Rebecca's body. But Earl wasn't done. He knew that burying Rebecca was only the first step in his twisted plan. To ensure Jacob took the fall for the crime, Earl carefully staged evidence to frame his son. He smeared Rebecca's blood onto her scarf, then buried it in the backyard of the parsonage where Jacob and his family lived. He also used Jacob's stolen phone to send Rebecca flirtatious and incriminating messages, fabricating a fake affair between the two. Earl even went as far as planting Jacob's fingerprints on a piece of Rebecca's jewelry he'd taken from her body. With Rebecca's disappearance now the talk of the town, Earl watched as the community began to suspect Jacob. His plan was falling into place, but cracks were already beginning to show. The evidence seemed too convenient, too perfectly aligned, and those closest to Jacob began to question whether the accusations made any sense. Earl, however, remained calm, confident that his manipulation and lies would hold. But as the investigation continued, the twisted threads of his deception would start to unravel, revealing the horrifying truth. On June 20th, just 5 days after Rebecca's disappearance, investigators finally uncovered the chilling truth. While searching the wooded area near the church, they stumbled upon Rebecca's shallow grave. Her body, concealed under layers of dirt and debris, was discovered just as the first rays of dawn pierced through the trees. The scene was eerily silent, the only sound the rustling of leaves as the investigators carefully dug her up. The stark reality of the murder hit them with full force. As they investigated more, a blood-stained scarf was found buried in the backyard of the parsonage where Jacob and his family lived. It was unmistakably Rebecca's. What was more damning, however, were the text messages from Jacob's phone. The messages had been sent from his phone, laced with flirtatious and inappropriate language that made in the backyard of the parsonage where Jacob and his family lived it appear as though he was having an affair with Rebecca. The messages were carefully timed, each one more incriminating than the last. The detectives pieced it together. Rebecca's body was discovered near the church, and now they had the evidence that pointed directly to Jacob Steele. With no other clear suspect, Jacob was arrested on June 21st. The news spread like wildfire across Carthage. The town that had once revered him as a man of faith and integrity now viewed him with suspicion and disgust. Jacob's once prominent position as a preacher was stripped away, and his reputation, built over years of service, was shattered in an instant. As Jacob sat behind bars, his hands shackled, his family torn apart, Earl Steele saw an opportunity. He positioned himself as the support system Hannah desperately needed in her time of grief and confusion. Earl, ever the manipulator, subtly exploited Hannah's vulnerability, feeding her doubts about Jacob's innocence. He played the role of the caring father-in-law, offering words of comfort and safety, all the while deepening his hold over her. With Jacob imprisoned and seemingly guilty, Earl knew the path was clear. He could now move in on what he had long desired, Hannah's affection. And so, with a heart of deceit and a mind consumed by greed, Earl took advantage of the unraveling tragedy, all while keeping the dark secret of his own monstrous actions hidden in the shadows. Jacob's defense attorney, Sarah Vaughn, was determined to uncover the truth. From the moment she took the case, she knew something about the situation didn't add up. As she dug deeper into the evidence, it became clear that the accusations against Jacob were based on a carefully constructed web of lies. The first crack in Earl's plan came when Sarah reviewed Jacob's cell phone records. It became evident that Jacob's phone wasn't with him at the time the alleged text messages were sent to Rebecca. The phone had been in his possession earlier that day, but the text exchanges, intended to look like flirtations between him and Rebecca, had occurred hours after he had been at home with his family. It was impossible for Jacob to have sent those messages. Sarah then turned her attention to the bloodied scarf found in Jacob's backyard. DNA testing revealed something even more startling. Rebecca's blood was on the scarf, yes, but it wasn't Jacob's DNA that had stained it. The blood matched Earl Steele's. The revelation struck like a lightning bolt. Earl had planted the evidence in a desperate attempt to make it look like Jacob had been involved with Rebecca, but it was his own blood that had been left behind. As the investigation continued, a breakthrough came when Billy "Red" Carter, the transient Earl had coerced into helping him, came forward. Billy, feeling guilty and fearing for his own safety, confessed to helping Earl bury Rebecca's body in the wooded area near the church. His testimony provided further proof of Earl's involvement in the crime, solidifying the growing suspicion that Jacob had been framed. But the most damning evidence was yet to come. In a twist that no one had anticipated, Jacob's wife, Hannah, discovered a journal belonging to Earl while cleaning out their home. The journal was filled with disturbing, obsessive thoughts about her, his resentment of Jacob's success, his feelings of inadequacy, and most chilling of all, his plan to frame Jacob for Rebecca's murder. The entries detailed Earl's dark desires and twisted fantasies, exposing a father's sickening jealousy and his willingness to destroy everything in his son's life to get what he wanted. The journal, along with the DNA evidence and Billy's confession, was enough to convince the court that Jacob had been wrongfully accused. The defense team now had the pieces they needed to turn the tide in Jacob's favor, but it was clear that the battle was far from over. Earl Steele's plan had begun to crumble, and the truth was on the verge of coming to light. During the trial, Earl Steele continued to play the role of the innocent man, sitting in the courtroom with a smug expression, as though the truth would never catch up to him. He watched as his own son, Jacob, faced the looming threat of the death penalty, his life hanging in the balance. But Earl's arrogance was his undoing. The turning point came when Billy "Red" Carter took the stand. With a deep, resigned sigh, Billy recounted how Earl had manipulated him into helping dispose of Rebecca's body, describing the chilling scene in the woods where they buried her. He spoke of the lies Earl had spun, the way he had orchestrated every detail of the frame-up to make Jacob the fall guy. As Billy's voice cracked, the courtroom was left in stunned silence. The weight of his testimony was undeniable. But the final blow came when Earl's journal, the one that contained his dark thoughts and twisted plans, was entered into evidence. The pages of the journal, stained with the weight of his obsession and resentment, were read aloud in the courtroom. It was clear now that Earl had planned the entire thing, every detail, every lie, all carefully crafted to destroy his son's life. The evidence was irrefutable. As the journal was read aloud, Earl's composure shattered. His face twisted in anguish as the weight of his actions finally hit him. His hands, once confidently resting on the table, began to shake. And in a moment that sent shockwaves through the room, Earl Steele stood up, tears streaming down his face, and confessed to the murder of Rebecca Taylor. His voice trembled as he admitted to everything, his jealousy, his desire to have Hannah for himself, and the twisted plan to frame Jacob for a crime he didn't commit. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of shock and disbelief as the man who had once been a pillar of the community finally admitted to his monstrous crimes. Earl Steele was convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His once proud life, built on lies and manipulation, was now reduced to nothing more than a prison sentence. Billy Carter, the man who had helped Earl cover his tracks, received a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison. A small price to pay for the role he played in unraveling Earl's deception. As for Jacob, the long-awaited exoneration finally came, but it was a bittersweet victory. Though his name was cleared, the damage was already done. His reputation had been tarnished beyond repair, and his family, once whole, was forever fractured by the betrayal. The town of Carthage was left divided. Some welcomed Jacob's return, rallying behind him as the victim of a horrible conspiracy, while others could never forget the scandal that had rocked their tight-knit community. Jacob's faith had been tested in ways he never imagined, and while he was exonerated, the scars of the ordeal would remain with him forever. The town would never be the same again. After the trial, Jacob and Hannah were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. The community may have celebrated Jacob's exoneration, but the couple found themselves facing an uphill battle. The trauma they had endured, both publicly and privately, was far from over. Hannah, devastated by the betrayal, began attending therapy to process the intense emotions she had kept bottled up for so long. The discovery that the man she had trusted and looked up to as her father-in-law had been the mastermind behind the murder and frame-up weighed heavily on her. She struggled to reconcile the man she had known with the monster he had become. The emotional scars of her husband's wrongful conviction, the loss of trust, and the constant reminder of her father-in-law's betrayal were not easily healed. Jacob, too, found himself wrestling with profound internal conflict. Though his name had been cleared and his innocence proven, the betrayal by his own flesh and blood haunted him. The man who had raised him, who had been his mentor and spiritual guide, had almost destroyed him. Yet, despite the pain and the anger that threatened to consume him, Jacob made the controversial decision to publicly forgive Earl. Standing before the press, he declared that he had chosen to forgive his father for the atrocities he had committed, for the lives he had ruined. His decision was met with mixed reactions. Some applauded him for his courage and his embodiment of Christian forgiveness, believing it to be a true reflection of his faith. Others, however, saw it as a betrayal of justice. How could someone forgive the man who had nearly destroyed everything they held dear? The debate raged in the town and in the media. Was Jacob right to forgive his father, or had he lost his way in the very faith he had spent years preaching to others? For Jacob, the act of forgiveness was a personal one. He knew that holding on to the bitterness would only eat away at him, but it was a difficult decision that cost him more than anyone could imagine. He tried to rebuild his life, his marriage, and his faith, but the scars of the past would never fade. The toll it took on his relationship with Hannah, who still struggled with the betrayal, was evident. They both knew their marriage would never be the same, but they clung to each other, determined to move forward. As for Earl, he sat in his prison cell, consumed by the consequences of his actions. His life, once filled with power and prestige, was now reduced to a shadow of what it once was. His obsession and jealousy had cost him everything: his family, his freedom, and his soul. The man who once preached of faith and redemption was now left to reflect on his sins behind bars. This case serves as a chilling reminder of how far jealousy and obsession can drive a person, and how even the most trusted relationships can hide unspeakable darkness. It also raises the question of whether true justice can ever be achieved when the wounds run so deep. Could forgiveness ever truly heal the damage done? Or is redemption only possible when the full weight of one's actions is faced and atoned for? The story of Jacob Steele and his family will echo in the hearts of those who witnessed it for years to come. What do you think? Was Jacob right to forgive Earl, or should he have left his father to rot without reconciliation? Let us know in the comments below. Your thoughts and opinions matter to us, and we'd love to hear from you. Thank you for watching True Crime Exposed. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more shocking cases like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and keep digging into the mysteries that lurk beneath the surface.